I've heard from several reliable sources that Halloween is over. But these sources don't know Halloween like I do. Hello, friends and enemies. Welcome to Horror and Inconvenience, where things are usually spooky and always weird. And thank you for joining me for my extremely belated October reading wrap-up. You may be wondering why it took me so long to film this video. Let's just say I had some business to conclude. Samhain is, after all, a busy time for all of us regular humans. Well, as fellow regular humans, you all know what I'm talking about. So, without further ado, what did I, a regular human, read this spooky season? First, I want to talk about some comics. In addition to volumes 3 and 4 of Happy Sugar Life, I still don't know what I think about that series, but I'm going to keep reading it. I finished the 3-volume manga series, A Witch's Love at the End of the World. This is a very pretty series about 2 girls at a witch school who fall in love. But as witches, they risk losing their power if they fall in love. Ooh. It's, not very spooky. Definitely my least spooky read of the season, but absolutely delightful. And at only 3 volumes, it's easy to obtain and finish, so I would recommend it to anybody who's into that kind of trash, which I am, as a regular human, into this witch trash. The other comic I read is new this October. It's Squad by Maggie Tokuda-Hall, illustrated by Lisa Sterle. This was delightful. It's serving Mean Girls, it's serving Ginger Snaps, it's serving Jennifer's Body. All of that except the lesbians are explicit. It's about a girl who moves to a new school, joins a clique, the clique is werewolves. Oh, and they're killing boys, obviously. I mean, like boys who are mean to girls and who don't understand consent. It's great. It's extremely satisfying. Catharsis all around. It's good. Read it. It looks nice, too. Next up, a spooky young adult pick. House of Holo by Krystal Sutherland. Now this is something that you probably saw on BookTube when it came out a year or 2 ago. Hey dudes, it's Editing Eve here. So immediately after I finished filming this video, I saw that Jordaline from Jordaline Reads had posted her October wrap-up and had also read House of Holo. So I'm not disagreeing with every single thing she says on purpose. Yeah, so I wasn't copying her on purpose. I do copy her on purpose a lot because she's an angel. But in this case, totally by accident. Didn't mean to do a contradictory thing here. Also, I realized from her review that I got some of the details wrong, like the girls actually return a month after being kidnapped, not a year. Anyway, I don't know. Go watch Jordaline Reads if you're not already, which you are because you're watching this. I understand it was extremely popular, I'm sure partially due to just an outstanding cover design. Really kind of worth buying for the way it looks alone. But on top of that, it's also a very good book. I can't tell you the full premise without giving things away, which is always a good sign in my opinion. But it's about 3 sisters who disappeared as young children, only to reappear in the same spot a year later, but changed. Their dark hair has turned white, their light eyes have turned black, and they're odd, uncontrollable. There are elements of dark folk tales and fae stories in here, although it's not a fae story. Again, I can't give too much else away, but the characters are fascinating. And the narrator is a believable teenager who's unnaturally mature due to what she's been through and feels like a teenager without talking down to the teenagers it's written for, which growing up was always my favorite kind of book, and it still holds up for me now. Plus, there's some beautiful imagery. The eldest sister is a fashion designer, and some of the outfits described in this book, well, I'm trying to get my fashion designer friend to read this in hopes that she will feel called to recreate them. Let's just say that. Overall, it's a wonderful book. It's aesthetically appealing and truly viscerally horrifying in some parts. Especially toward the end. I can't give it away, but I was shocked that a young adult book went there. It's great. Read it. I actually really liked all of my reading this month. Possibly because I was saving some favorites for spooky season. One thing I read this season is a classic. I don't have it with me because a friend borrowed it immediately after I finished it so we could talk about it. But I'll put a picture up somewhere with regular editing, not spells. Oh. One of my candles is burned out. We're running out of time. The book that I'm talking about is The King in Yellow by Robert W. Chambers, a horror classic predating and influencing Lovecraft. The King in Yellow is a series of horror stories from the late 19th century that centers around an imaginary play, also called The King in Yellow, a play that is unspeakably beautiful and engaging, but anyone who reads it all the way through inevitably goes mad and or falls into despair. With this connecting thread, the stories are actually pretty various. There are definitely huge elements that other writers at the time were also really invested in. Some real echoes of Poe, of Wells and Verne. One story feels almost ripped out of a Hawthorne book. Definitely some Washington Irving elements too. What's really interesting is that these stories also more or less take place in a slightly alternate America. An America that Chambers probably thought of as utopian, but is extremely problematic, more effectively imperialist. Black people and Native Americans have been segregated into their own states, so white people entirely own New York City, which, I mean, if you know anything about New York City, sounds like a nightmare to me. The government has begun installing lethal chambers so that people who are suicidal or terminally ill can safely, well, not safely, comfortably take their own lives, which is hailed as a triumphant piece of mercy, but it's designed by the logic of the story more to remove the burden of the mentally and physically ill from the society rather than to actually provide, you know, assisted suicide for people who really need it, the terminally ill. So eugenics. There's a lot of eugenics. Trigger warning for just all of the eugenics, especially in the first half of the book. This is something you run into a lot in 19th century literature, so I can't say that I was surprised. I primarily just experienced distaste, which, since they're horror stories, didn't really put me off. But I wouldn't recommend this book to someone who isn't critically equipped to filter out the more insidious elements of the framing. I wouldn't recommend it to someone who's easily triggered by ableism, because there is a lot of that. All of that out of the way, I do actually have a lot of praise for these stories, especially the one that features a sculptor who develops a chemical compound capable of turning living things to stone. That is a fascinating, engaging story, and also one of those classic horror tales in which the plot could have entirely been solved by polyamory, but no one has told the characters about polyamory. So, in conclusion, The King in Yellow is worth a read if you can stomach it. Chambers was a great writer, clearly. I wouldn't want him at a dinner party. Next up is a read I know a lot of people have been looking forward to. It was a new release this October, or possibly at the end of September, and that is A Touch of Jen by Beth Morgan. Yeah, it's a real good design. Actually, I need you to see the full design of this book. Okay, so here's the cover. Spine. Ooh. The back is dripping mysterious black fluid. Alright, but here is the real kicker. Okay. First of all, I want you to see these delightful pink end papers. And when you take the cover off, it's a holographic spine! So, my magpie self was extremely pleased with this purchase. Not only that, but the book is good. It tells the story of a couple, Remy and Alicia, who, when I bought the book, I thought were lesbians, but Remy is actually a man, which, that's Beth Morgan's bad, because the story could have been lesbians. But, despite that, it's actually a very good story. As a couple, Remy and Alicia are both completely obsessed with Remy's old work acquaintance, Jen, following all of her social media, constantly discussing her Instagram, and even role-playing with Alicia as Jen in bed, which, ew. Yeah, so in this story, they weave themselves into Jen's life. Things get weird and creepy, but it's an interesting book because it's not really a thriller. The first half reads like one of those millennial comedies of manners, think Otessa Moshfegh. And it's only in the second half that the story turns vaguely supernatural, and as one reviewer on the back of the book put it, turns in the last maybe quarter into a slasher gore fest. So, I mean, when one genre I love slowly morphs into another genre I also love, I'm with you. You know, I'm coming along for the ride and I'm enjoying myself. I thought the writing was masterful in that she really had control over the prose. It always did exactly what it was supposed to do. And that, as anyone else who also likes to write in their spare time knows, is really hard to do. So, Beth Morgan, one to watch. I will definitely be reading her future books. And A Touch of Jen is a fun ride. Another really buzzy book that came out about halfway through this month was Nothing But Blackened Teeth by Cassandra Khaw. It's really, really short, as you can see. In fact, I've had a lot of people, I work at a bookstore, and I've had a lot of customers say they're not interested in spending hardback book money on a book this short. And I gotta say, they're wrong. This book is worth it. It is genuinely disturbing. This is the story of a group of friends who's celebrating one couple's marriage, goes to Japan to stay in a haunted mansion, and is the story of a classic Japanese ghost bride. And that's just not a very good summary, because what it fails to get at is that the experience of this book is not rote. It's not expected. Even though that's a very classic, like, horror movie, horror book setup, the main character is, there's a lot going on in the main character's head, and as she's the narrator, we have not only the story as it occurs, but elements of her later reflection, and elements of the past that's haunting her at the time she goes there. She's recently been released from a mental institution due to a suicide attempt. And the stigma, the way that her friends, former friends really, treat her, the way they tiptoe around her and blame her for her depression, it adds an element of quotidian horror that really elevates the supernatural horror. It's genuinely a scary book. I read and watch a lot of scary things, so, pretty jaded about that a lot of the time. It takes a lot. But there were moments when I was reading this book and I looked up and looked around me and I thought, it's too quiet in here. Genuinely scary. Literal chills at one point. It's worth a read. It's definitely not for the faint of heart. The cover is scary on purpose. You need to know what you're getting into. But it's real good. Finally, no October is complete without a little bit of Dracula. So I read A Dowry of Blood by S.T. Gibson. Look at that cover. Look at that little Danse Macabre. So cute. By the way, if you hear any snuffling in the background, that's my cat. Normal cat. Not in any way a familiar. Anyway, Dowry of Blood is the story of Dracula narrated by one of Dracula's brides. So it's about Dracula and not about him at the same time. The narrator, Constanza, is the eldest of Dracula's brides, a Romanian peasant made sometime in the Middle Ages into a vampire. And it tells the story of her, sort of haunted marriage to Dracula, and of the way that they added to their polyamorous marriage across the centuries. Everyone's bisexual, it's very pretty, there's an aura of menace to do with the fact that Dracula is, not a good dude. This is Henry. No respect for my outfit. Perhaps don't keep a sentient furball around when you prefer to wear black. Okay, honey. Let's try over here. Don't catch on fire. All right. A Dowry of Blood was a really great read to me. The language is beautiful. It's ponderous and melancholy. It has a lot of gravity. It's not a funny book, but just really well written, really believable as an immortal's point of view, I think, while still being really human. It's one of those books in which the polyamory is explicit but does not solve any problems, and I really honor that as well. It also has some Anne Rice vibes. I mean, honestly, I think it was written with a better mind to editing than Anne Rice has ever had, but definitely a lot of the same elements in the vampire lore. So if you like her, you'll like this. And if you like Dracula, you'll like this. What are you doing? Read it right now. You should read it. So, those were all my October reads. And since this video is so late, there is one November read I want to add on. The reason for this is that I have some big projects in the works right now, and I'm probably not going to get to making another wrap-up until January, because a lot of my reading is specifically oriented toward those projects. You'll notice I didn't mention Bunnicula in this video. That's because you were there with me when I read it. So, that said, I want to get my first November read out of the way to make that eventual wrap-up video shorter. And that was Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke by LaRocca. Yeah, I gave in to the trend. I read that one. I wouldn't exactly say I regret it, because I was always going to wonder what was going on with it if I didn't give it a try. So we started carrying it at my store. I saw how short it was. I have an employee discount. I grabbed it. I'm not able to show it off to you right now. First of all, because Hens requires both my hands for scratches. And second of all, because I sent it off to a friend for a book trade. The friend being Jesse of Bartell's Bookshelf. I'll link him in the description. Great dude. Yeah, so Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke. It's kind of the opposite of A Touch of Jen, in that A Touch of Jen could have been better if it was lesbians. I think Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke would be a lot better if it wasn't lesbians. LaRocca, if he's met a lesbian, then that lesbian is not doing her due diligence in screening her friendships. There's going to be a little spoilery talk here, so just honestly skip forward until you no longer see the picture of the book cover if you're afraid of spoilers. And I'm going to say a few things that really retread what Juan of Plagued by Vision said when he reviewed this book. I'm not going to link to that, because if you're watching this channel, there's 100% chance that either you already watch his channel or you're a relative of mine. So, that being said, Things Have Gotten Worse Since We Last Spoke has elements that I did find appealing. It really gets down to what a lot of horror is about at its core, which is bad BDSM etiquette. It's literally so much of my favorite horror is just BDSM that's not safe, sane, or consensual. Every Clive Barker book comes to mind. And that's what it is. It's set in 2001, something like that. Before September 11th, but after the famous Brittany and Justin joutfits. So, a girl posts on a queer online forum selling an antique apple peeler that belonged to her grandmother. Another girl responds asking to purchase it. They very quickly enter into an extremely unethical long-distance BDSM relationship. And all of that, fine. Actually pretty solid. Some of the portrayals of toxic relationship dynamics I found really incisive, and definitely disturbing. First half of the book was pretty solid. Unfortunately, the first half is only like 35 pages. And it goes off the rails in a bad way. Juan talked about Tapeworm Baby. If you've read this, you know what I'm talking about. If you haven't read this, I think those words were pretty self-explanatory. And it really is indicative of a special kind of misogyny, I think. The idea that, well, the idea of queer sterility, of queer people being a dead end, is extremely problematic in and of itself. And then there's the fact that a woman wants a baby so desperately that she'll replace it with a parasite, which I have to say, there were contexts in which that could work. I mean, I personally find the idea of pregnancy horrifying, and there's a lot of really solid pregnancy horror, although it's usually lacking something because it's usually written by men, or, no, usually written by men, and, you know, they don't have a comprehensive understanding of what it's like to live in a body that's always under threat of that. Obviously, I'm not trying to exclude trans men here, but I'm talking about cis men, you know, Ira Levin and people like that, who are trying, and sometimes succeeding, but there's just something missing there. And Eric LaRocca kind of seems like he barely tried, so what could have been interesting if handled with great delicacy, it was just bad. It was a bad ending of the book, and I didn't like the second half. But a lot of people have said that this book is kind of a love it or hate it thing. I didn't feel that way. I kind of liked parts and disliked other parts. I would say my feelings on it are mixed, but it definitely wasn't as successful as all of my October reading. Oh, look at Hens comforting me. My little dusty muppet. Yeah, so, as things have gotten worse since we last spoke, I look forward to seeing what Jesse thinks of it, and he is sending me a copy of As Meat Loves Salt. So, that will probably be in my next wrap-up. Once my mysterious projects are through for the season. For the next video, you can probably expect that I'll finally finish part 2 of the Secret Fairy Tales story. And, yeah, that's all I got. And, certain little abandoned haunted puppet here really asking for my attention, so I'm gonna go do normal human stuff now. Please do all the algorithm things if you feel so inclined, and yeah, our time is up.